her stretching out.
Schilling Show continues on a Manic Monday, and it's always a pleasure to welcome here in studio on occasion. We are graced with the presence of Congressman Bob Good, representing Virginia's 5th District, and also the chair of the Freedom Caucus, which is so important in setting policy and keeping the reins on the errant Republicans and, of course, the Democrats, which are beyond hope, unfortunately, in the United States Congress, House of Representatives. Bob, welcome back. Happy Monday, and thanks for joining us today.
Good afternoon, Rob. Great to be with you. Thanks for having me again.
All right, so we've got so much on our plate today. Let's go to the border, first of all. I know you were there not too long ago. What did you observe? And let's talk about who's actually coming across, because this is the scary part.
It was my 6th trip, and different than the first 5 times, there was more blatant, explicit dozens coming while we were there, surrendering to Border Patrol right in front of us. In my previous 5 trips, when you have what looks like an official party, that's there at the border, you tend not to see much traffic. In this case, we were seeing dozens come across, just coming up and surrender to Border Patrol. And the roughly 8 million who've come and done that over the over these last 3 years that Biden's been in control are those folks who are probably, most of them, looking for a better life. Biden's welcoming them with free housing, free travel, free social services, free health care, free education, no consequence, released without a court date. Those are the ones that are mostly economic migrants. I mean, why wouldn't you come here if we're going to welcome you and promise you amnesty and promise you all the free stuff? The most dangerous consequence, though, is the 2 million gotaways, as we call them. They find about 100 dumb terrorists in the 8 million about 100 a year in the 8 million who surrender. They'll find about 100 a year on the terrorist watch list. I guess they don't think we're vetting properly, and we're not. They don't think they'll be caught, I guess. But how many do you think might be among the 2 million who don't surrender? They're the ones who they'll flood an area with hundreds of surrenders, and then while Border Patrol is processing them, then they'll send the really dangerous ones to the other locations, to what are called the gotaways. Those are the ones with the criminal backgrounds, trafficking, drugs, children, sex trafficking, and terrorist ties, and so forth. And irreparable harm has been done. Only time will tell on those 2 million.
You know, we hear a lot from the left. They're still talking about slavery, which has been abolished in this country for a long, long time. And yet I don't hear the word being used. You talk about sex trafficking. That is actual slavery for sexual exploitation purposes. And I just don't understand how it is that people just go, well, we're just going to look past that. Why don't we have a substantive conversation?
Yes, the criminal cartels, Mexican crime cartels, control everything that comes across the border. Everyone comes across having paid them or owing them and willing to work off what they owe. What we were told on this last visit was that Chinese nationals are paying up to $70,000 to come across. If you're coming just from Mexico, it's just a few $1,000s. And, of course, all of those people don't have that money, but they come with, as indentured servants, having to work it off. There's threat of killing their family back home if they don't pay. They get paid. The Mexican crime cartels get paid. They make billions of dollars on a monthly basis. They told us, we were in Eagle Pass, Texas, in the Del Rio sector, that right there in that one sector, that's where the Haitians were gathered, a year or so ago under the bridge. But they make $30 million a week just in that sector, is what they told us while we were
The cartels.
There. Yes, they do.
This is astounding that we have this situation going on, and yet Biden is acting as if his hands are tied, that he somehow needs legislation. And I know that you've had H.R. 2 put forward, which is common sense legislation. But what could he do if he were so inclined and actually aware of what was going on?
Well, the purpose of H.R. 2, to your point, is to codify into law the policies that were working on the Trump administration, so it wouldn't just be executive action. Right. Good policies executed by a president, but it would be codified in the law and take an act of Congress, congressional action, to reverse it. So what this president can do is reverse the policies that he changed when he took office. So he stopped the construction of the border wall. Obviously, we're paid billions of dollars not to complete the wall. He stopped Remain in Mexico, where the thousands that are coming across on a daily basis with bogus asylum claims, about 90% are bogus asylum claims. They had to wait in Mexico to have their claim heard, and then if it was bogus, they didn't get to come into the country, so they stopped coming. In Mexico, since they had to house them in their country, forced upon them by Trump, they all of a sudden were concerned about their own southern border rather than be a pass-through country if they had to house the illegals there. He reinstated catch and release, where we catch them instead of detaining or return. Trump had to detain or return. You either keep them until they're properly dealt with, or you return them. You send them right back. And Biden instead has instituted catch and release. So basically, he's taken executive action on purpose to open the border. He's saying now he can't reverse that, which is obviously not true. And that's why they've moved to trying to pass a bad pretend border bill, this Mayorkas-Langford deal that was announced last night.
The wall has been a topic of conversation on national talk radio, and this is certainly an important component. I had heard, and I'd like you to confirm, or if you can, let us know what's going on, that Biden was actually selling off supplies that had already been purchased by Trump that were just lying around the construction site, like steel and things like that, that Biden was disposing of them at fire sale prices.
Yes, not only did he stop the border construction, he has prohibited for 3 years any improvements to the border itself, such that even there's materials there that they had to place to improve the roads, because the terrain is very rugged and you got lots of wash that comes with the weather and so forth. So it's a treacherous, not easy area to travel for Border Patrol to patrol. They won't even allow, the Biden administration has not allowed Border Patrol to improve it or to maintain it. They basically cut off all maintenance, all construction at the border. And yes, just billions of dollars worth of assets that were rusting and rotting there. We even found a site where it was being stored and moved to on one of the previous border trips that I went to, and we saw it. We went and videoed that site where there was just rusting, as you said, materials. The border wall itself is not the panacea that fixes it all in itself, but clearly a wall makes a huge difference, and it allows the Border Patrol to be much more effective, much more efficient. You need far less manpower to patrol an area when you've got a 30-foot wall that is constructed with these materials that are very hard to penetrate.
Let's talk about what's going on in Texas, Governor Abbott versus the Biden administration. I think a lot of us have been waiting a long time for somebody to finally do what Governor Abbott did. He should have done it a long time ago, but standing up to the federal government saying, hey, if you're not going to do your job, it's incumbent upon us to do it.
Yes, Texas has tried to become the path of most resistance. Governor Abbott, obviously, his primary responsibility to the state of Texas specifically. And so as Texas has tried to step in the gap and to defend their citizens, protect their citizens, because of a federal government that is intentionally not doing that, of course, and facilitating the invasion, then what you start to see is more flow going to Arizona, New Mexico, and California. We've got these Democrat governors who want to be sanctuary states and sanctuary cities and so forth. But Texas has tried to build barriers and tried to, to protect their citizens. And what has the Biden administration done? They've sued them, they've fought them, they've taken them to court. So the Biden administration, which says, oh, we need more resources from Congress, we need more manpower from Congress. And then when Texas tries to step in the gap and do it, then they're preventing them from doing so. They've put barriers in place. They put floating barriers. Now, what Texas could do even more is to actually repel and return them, not let them in. They're literally fighting the federal government in trying to do that.
What have you heard about the Border Patrol and their perspective on all this? Because I heard that there was some statement, I don't know if it came from the union, that, hey, we're not going to go against the Texas National Guard. Do you know where that stands? Well,
the Border Patrol are, outstanding men and women who are trying to work hard, put in a very tough position. They're frustrated. They've become processors instead of patrol officers, if you will. They're busy kind of babysitting and getting illegals into the country. That's what they're required to do. They're not able to do their job to repel those who are trying to invade the country. They're not able to detain them and hold them. They're being released. They're going to these process centers and being released. And the morale is just terrible. And then they're put in a position of confrontation with Texas law enforcement, Texas Department of Public Safety and state police and Texas State Guard and so forth. And so they're put in a very difficult position where the federal government wants them to essentially fight with, maybe not physically, but fight with the Texas law enforcement who's trying to enforce the border in their own state.
I also understand that a number of states are sending National Guard to Texas, and there's a support of at least, I think I saw a letter of support from maybe half of the United States states attorneys general. So where do you see this going? How is this going to resolve itself?
I think you're going to end up having to see the judicial branch, the courts get involved, because Texas is trying to push the envelope and saying, hey, we have the right to do this if the federal government does. And Article 4, Section 4 of the Constitution says it's the responsibility of the federal government to protect the states from invasion. Clearly, the Biden administration is not only not protecting them, they're literally facilitating the invasion. And so Texas is standing in the gap, and the feds will say, okay, Texas cannot enforce federal law in terms of immigration law. They're not authorized to do that. Texas certainly has the right if they're breaking the law of the state of Texas, but there's questions whether or not they can actually enforce immigration law. And I think that they should fully do it. They should fully return the illegals who are coming across. They're not immigrants, they're aliens. Fully return them, not allow them in, and just push the envelope and get in a legal battle with the federal government.
You mentioned, Bob, and we're talking with 5th District Congressman Bob Good. You mentioned about the number coming in here from China, coming in from the Middle East and so forth, the gotaways, but even the ones that we catch, the dumb ones as you reference. What do you think, or what do you fear may be their intention? Because as people talking about 10/7 style attack in the United States, that this may be in response to something Iran does or receives on behalf of the U.S.
Yes, again, differentiating between the 8 million and these are the DHS, Department of Homeland Insecurity's numbers under Mayorkas. Ironically, that's who Langford was negotiating with, the guy we're going to try to impeach this week. But you've got 8 million they acknowledge that they have allowed into the country, that have surrendered because they surrendered for Biden's generous policies for all the free stuff. And then there's, again, the 2 million that the known gotaways are the ones that they see and estimate. They see them moving, not the unknowns, which are even more. But let's just say 2 million. So if you're among those who wear the camo head to foot, you've got the carpet shoes on, you're evading apprehension, you don't surrender for all the free stuff, we can only speculate on who they are and what they're doing and what their intent is. We know they're the ones that are trafficking, again, the children and the women and the drugs. And when you can only presume if you've got 100 terrorist ties individuals found the terrorist watch list of those who surrender, how many of the 2 million? So let's just do percentages. If you thought that 90% of those were just confused individuals who didn't know about all the free stuff, and they know our laws and they know our policies, there's a reason why they're gotaways. But let's just pretend 90% are good guys. Only 10% of 2 million wish us harm. What could 200,000 do? 9/11 was some 19 people. 2,000 or so Hamas terrorists did what happened back on October 7. What could 200,000 do? I submit and have submitted now for the 3 years is we will only know who's been let in this country and the harm they intend us when the border is sealed. As long as their accomplices are still getting to come in here, they're going to wait to arrive at critical mass, full strength, before they begin to wreak their havoc. And that's why I say often, no president in the history of the country has ever done more to intentionally harm the United States than what this president has done with the border. Who has ever done that as a president, intentionally tried to harm the United States on a scope or a scale the way this president has done with the border? How could you arrive at any other conclusion?
I don't see a way. We're talking with 5th District Congressman Bob Good. You can send me an email, robs@wina.com, robs@wina.com. We'll come back on the other side with more. Stay with the Schilling Show, and you can also give us a call. It is 434-977-1070. 977-1070 is the phone number. We'll get to as much as we can. There's so much to say in so little time as the Schilling Show continues here on a Manic Monday. Stay with us.
Catfish are jumping, that paddle wheel bumping, black water keep rolling on past just the same.
WINA.
All right, the Schilling Show continues here on a Manic Monday. Congressman Bob Good here in the studio with us for one more segment. We're going to get to as much as we possibly can. A couple of emails. Pat, grateful for you, and thank you very much for coming on the show today. Can the Republicans realistically win back the presidency in light of the illegal invasion and concerns over the machines being compromised?
I would say we've got to overwhelm them at the polls. How could it possibly be close? You want to say to yourself, with a president that's done so much harm to the country, the American people are suffering under these policies. Hopefully we've suffered enough, and we're connecting the harm and the suffering and the damage that's been done to bad policy, to this president, to the Democrats in the Senate, and the American people hopefully will overwhelm. But the one thing we must all do is get everybody that we know to vote. Statistically, red areas don't vote in the highest percentages that blue areas do. We've got to overwhelm them. It can't be close. There are 50, in terms of election integrity, it's a 50-state solution. The legislatures of each respective state is responsible for the integrity of their particular elections. And many of us would like to go back to the paper ballots. I don't know if that's a realistic thing to think that all 50 states would do that. But certainly we got to overwhelm at the polls, have everybody working, get everybody voting, and it can't be close.
There's another dirty trick underway right now, and I'm sure you're on the forefront of trying to combat it, but this is the idea that the census refuses to ask if someone's a citizen. So we're getting congressional apportionment on illegal aliens. What's going on with that?
Yes, it should be just U.S. citizens, and of course the Biden administration doesn't want to do that. The Trump administration did support, the Biden administration doesn't. The Democrats, of course, always want to do things that facilitate cheating. That's why they like unsolicited mail ballots. That's why they like third-party ballot handling. That's why they like ballot drop boxes away from polling places. That's why they want extended voting periods. That's why they don't want voter ID. All of that is designed to make it easier to cheat. There's no other way around it. And we need to stand for voter integrity. I've got a bill that would deny federal funding to any locale or state. It's called One Citizen, One Vote. Well, we don't want the federal government running the elections, because then you could have Pelosi, Schumer, Biden doing that 2 years ago. But we can deny federal funding to locales that don't meet basic integrity standards, and that's what my bill does.
Caller offline says, why doesn't anybody say treason? What the president is doing or lack of doing is treason. And I think that, we have the 25th Amendment there, but there's a good insurance policy sitting in the seat of the vice presidency. So how do we continue, and God forbid Joe Biden would get reelected, but how do we continue to have a country in this situation?
There's so many existential threats to the country under this administration that you could point to, that any one in and of themselves in normal times you would say was the worst threat to the country. The crushing debt, the $34 trillion, the $200 billion monthly deficit, that's an existential threat. Mm-hmm. The border invasion is an existential threat. The weakening of our military is an existential threat. The surrender of our energy dominance or even independence and trying to move to unreliable, unaffordable energy, that's a national security issue. That's an economic security issue. The undermining of our elections integrity, as we just were talking about. And if people don't have faith and trust in elections, the weaponization of the federal government and law enforcement against its citizens, a two-tiered justice system, just what's going on with those pro-lifers who just got arrested under the FACE Act and so forth. This Department of Injustice treating Catholics differently. They claimed it was just one field office. Now we know that's multiple. The suppression of information and speech and expression and on big tech and colluding with the federal government. There are so many things. That's why it's so important. Again, it can't be close to overwhelm these folks at the polls. Everybody's got to vote. Everybody's got to recognize how important it is. We have a majority of the people who participate. We're not a government majority. We're a majority of the people who actually participate.
Rick writes in and wants to know your evaluation of Speaker Johnson thus far.
Speaker Johnson, I guess I would say he's an improvement over the previous speaker. Yeah. That's setting the bar very low, obviously, in that the fact that he's a man of deep faith, he has personal convictions, he's a genuine conservative, he's an honest guy, and I like and I respect him on a personal level. That said, I'm extremely disappointed in the results that have been achieved. The two things that I would point that he's done well would be the Mayorkas impeachment. We should have done it a year earlier. Mm-hmm. McCarthy had enough evidence of 2 years of this border invasion that we should have started it in January a year ago. We didn't start it until November after Johnson got to become Speaker, and so that's a positive. It doesn't matter the Senate won't convict. We're responsible for what we do in the House. Secondly, what he did was the first supplemental for Israel that was paid for, standalone. We're going to pay for it out of cutting the IRS funding, instead of letting it packaged together and hijacked by funding for Ukraine and this other stuff. But you saw a waiver of that over the weekend. On Friday, he announced we're going to do a standalone Israel that's not paid for. I am vehemently against that. Israel's our number one ally, our most important ally. The Republican Party, we have almost unanimous, if not unanimous, support for Israel. I enthusiastically support that. However, we shouldn't be borrowing from our kids and our grandkids, which inhibits our ability to respond to crises in the future. Israel doesn't have $34 trillion in debt and $200 billion deficit like we do. We can pay for it by cutting the UN funding. Cut the UN funding to fund Israel. Cut the WHO funding to fund Israel. Cut the IRS expansion to fund Israel. Cut the climate credits to fund Israel. There's many ways we can do that, and I'm concerned that we would borrow to do it instead of cutting something else to offset it. But Speaker Johnson was right to do those two things.
Michael wants to know, what about impeachment? Why haven't we just gone forward with impeaching Biden?
We should, and I signed on to impeachment articles in my first term, and I have supported that since about a year that I got into Congress because of the border invasion. Again, we've got 10 million pieces of evidence, as we've talked about, the 10 million illegals that we know about have come into this country under this president's policies as welcomed generously by him. In addition, we're pursuing impeachment, and that's to Johnson's credit also. With the impeachment inquiry, he had a formal impeachment inquiry move forward, investigating the Biden crime family. It's not about Hunter Biden. He's just a tool to get to Joe Biden, how compromised he is in this influence peddling, bribery scheme. And the media and the Dems will say, oh, there's no evidence. We've got text messages, emails, we've got visit histories, we've got travel logs, we've got LLCs created, shell companies. We've got suspicious activity reports, which is when the banks report something that looks like criminal activity. It's got over 170 of those. You've got check copies. You've got eyewitness testimony, whistleblowers. There's mounting growing evidence, and Jamie Comer's Oversight Committee has pursued that under the authority of Speaker Johnson, so that is a good thing. The previous question asked me, what do I think? Where we've really failed, though, with Speaker Johnson, I didn't get to this point, is the spending bills, the bad tax bill from last week, the major pieces of legislation, the failure to reform FISA, all the big stuff. We've joined hands with Democrats, passed those with predominantly Democrat votes. That's the failures of the past. That's got to stop, and Speaker Johnson's going to have to be held accountable for that.
Let's talk finally in our remaining couple minutes, Congressman Bob Good, about the spending fight where we are. This just keeps coming up, and we keep kicking the can down the road. So where are we right now?
Well, we ought to utilize the big issue that we've been talking about. We ought to use the spending battles to force this administration to secure the border. We ought not to give them the money to fund a government that's facilitating this invasion. Where we are right now is we have continued again with a third continuing resolution, one on September 30. That was the end of the previous speaker. Then one in the middle of November, and now one in late January. Voted against all of those because they kept in place the Biden, Pelosi, Schumer policies that are destroying the country, as if we didn't take the majority. By the way, these are still the policies that were in place from the omnibus that was in after the last election, December of 22 rather. So these have been in place for 14 months now. And then the spending levels, again, the $200 billion monthly deficit, we haven't made any changes on the policies or the spending levels materially since we've had the majority, because we've passed these bills with predominantly Democrat support. And the reason has been, Rob, is we are afraid of a government shutdown, which is a temporary pause in the operations of the 15% of the government that's considered non-essential. And while a government shutdown is not anybody's goal per se, that's not the worst thing. The worst thing is to keep doing what we've been doing. And if you've refused to suffer or risk a government shutdown and your opponent knows that, they'll just say no, and then you cave and you keep everything in place like we've done. That's where the speaker has failed. I believe he's operating out of fear. I believe he's got bad staff in his ear. I believe he's listening to the wrong people. And we as a conference have to convince him that we will stand and fight with him through a government shutdown and make the Democrats yield first. So what's going to happen? We're going to get to early March, and the government funding is going to expire again. And I fear that we're going to cave and do with the Democrats and just kick the can down the road. And then at some point we'll finish funding the government for this year, which expires on September 30, and then it's upon us to fund the government for next year. After September 30, we're going into an election time. Mm-hmm. You know the Republicans aren't going to fight going into an election time. So I suspect you'll have continuing resolutions going until January of 25, when hopefully we'll have a new president. Hopefully we'll have control of the Senate. Hopefully we'll have an expanded House majority, even though we haven't really earned it from the American people, and we'll be able to bring true change to Washington.
Bob, if people would like to get more information on your campaign, if they would like to be in touch with you, tell us the ways they can do those things.
Well, from the campaign standpoint, it's bobgoodforcongress.com, bobgoodforcongress.com. They can contribute online. They can get an address. They can find out about our events that we're having. They can sign up for our newsletter so that they're informed. And I trust the people of the 5th District. I'm asking for them to let me serve another 2 years. And, of course, I announced my candidacy at our event with 300 people about a week and a half ago. Great support, and we're feeling that as we travel the 5th District. Unfortunately, I'm on my way back to Washington, and I'll finish up with you here in just a few moments.
Bob Good, thank you for what you do. Thank you for coming in here today and sharing all these important perspectives on the Schilling Show. We appreciate it.
Thank you, Rob. God bless you, my friend.